Hi and welcome to this week's Mailbox. This is just a selection of questions or statements that have come up that are worthy of going through with a bit of a more detailed response. And the first one, this is related to the fallout from class discords. It says, this is why I load the answer sim it, because most of the time don't want a perfect answer, especially when it comes to trinkets. They want general advice. They want to know if a trinket is decent for their class or garbage that looks good. They want to know how important the tier set is if they've only got 4 bits, not all 6. They want to know which trash legendaries and which are good. Simming is good, but for most people, all they need is stuff advice. I'm not sure I agree with that, actually, because if you're going to come on and ask which trinket should I use or which legendary should I use or something like that, you're not asking for general advice. If you're asking for general advice, you would say, in which general situations would this trinket be good if it ever is? In which case you would never get the answer sim it to a question like that. You will get, no, that trinket's useless under all circumstances, or that trinket might be okay under these circumstances, because that's not what elicits the response sim it. And the thing is, simming is actually so quick and simple now as well. Didn't used to be. Granted, I had a lot of sympathy for people, especially towards the start of Legion, because the thing is, before Legion, you could almost go by Bislis. I mean, Bislis, even in WoD, just because of the nature of things then, you know, wasn't really, but it was a lot better than it is now. I mean, just sockets and Warforged alone meant that Bislis weren't always that cut and dry. But in Legion, no, forget about it. So you can't even just say, well, this is your Bis list. You had to sort of say, well, you're going to have to sim it. But now it's so easy with raid bots as well. But absolutely, I would say when you get in the response sim it, it is because you're not asking for general advice. If you think that saying which is better between these two things, or which, you know, is this trinket any good, you're asking for general advice, you're phrasing the question wrong, I would have to say about that one. So I think some of, obviously, class discords have had a lot of stick in the... Well, actually, a lot of stick, that's actually not true. They had some stick from a very influential source, and then an immediate backlash. The vast majority of feedback to this so-called source was hugely disparaging of it, to the point where it was completely retracted. But nonetheless, you know, this is one of the issues that I would pick on, because I certainly know that there must be some people who come to class discords and go away going, oh no, that's not quite what I was after. And I think some of it is just because of this, really. So, I mean, I would say people should embrace the simming now, even, you know, much less serious players, because it's so quick. It's so easy to do for a particular piece of gear. I'm not talking about doing loads and loads of combinations of gear, but if for a particular, like a trinket, like you say, like a particular trinket, is it good or not? Simming it is the ideal way to do it. Because, yeah, raid bot's so easy now. Next one, sorry. In regards to being able to do X and having to do X is a balance that can never be reached. The majority of the player base won't do something that has no big reward behind it that can increase their player power, but at the same time, no matter how little that reward is, many people will turn around and claim something that is even a very minor upgrade as forced to be done. Agree and disagree with this. First of all, pick this statement. The majority of the player base won't do something that has no big reward behind it. Is not true at all. People do stuff all the time that has no reward behind it at all that increases the power of their character, such as going out and farming transmog. The reason why I think this perception can arise in the first place in WoW is because there is almost nothing to do in the game that doesn't increase your power. Blizzard specifically designed Legion to make sure that everything increased your power. But if you look at other MMOs, or you look at what people did in the games, you know, when this wasn't the case, that's not true at all. There's plenty of stuff that people will do that don't directly increase their power. You know, increasing their cosmetic options and things like that, for example. It's just in WoW, there isn't actually very much, if any, of that. I mean, you look at the effort that people went to get class mounts, for example. That is not increasing their power. But people did it anyway. I mean, you know, and it's a significant amount of time invested to be able to do that, for example. I mean, there's 2 things that don't increase your power at all. One of them, rather ironically named, that lots of people have done. And I haven't. You know, balance of power, for example, that quest line, I didn't bother with that. I will at some point, just for the hell of it, but I didn't bother with that. But lots of people have on multiple characters. And the other thing, your class mounts is another one, which again, I've done on my main character because, you know, I'll sort of at some point get around to doing quests on my paladin, including balance of power when I can be bothered. But I'm not, you know, not going to do it on a lot of other characters, if any. So people have put time into that. The Mage Tower artifact appearance, for example, there's a lot of people still doing that and doing that on multiple outs, or at least doing it on multiple specs on the same character. That doesn't increase your power as well. So it's not true to say that the majority of the player base won't do something that's no big reward. You get everyone from the upper end right down to very, very casual wanting to do those things. All right. What they tend to resent more is actually the stuff that does give you the power. And then the other side of it, it says how little that reward is. People will turn around and claim that something is even a very minor upgrade is forced to be done. At a certain level, it's true, though. You know, if you're at the level of progress raiding, something that gives you a little bit of extra power does need to be done. Because you can have a situation where you have an extremely low wipe. And you might think, or where you die on a boss, which again turns into a very low wipe. You know, you could almost have killed it. And you don't have much overkill. So a bit higher item level, a bit more stamina would have helped you out. Or again, just come into the general power, maybe the artifact level of your weapon. Low percentage wipes. If you have two guilds that are around about the same level, one of them insists that everyone has their 75 artifact traits, and the other one doesn't, which means, of course, a lot of people won't. Then you might have a situation where one of those guilds kills that boss, and then the other one, you know, it's the last pull of the night, say, last pull of the reset. The other one doesn't have a chance to do it for several days now. So it can make a difference. It can make a big difference. Sometimes as well, when you kill a boss for the first time, you sort of know the first kill can be a lucky pick. Sometimes it's like inevitable. You just get better and better, and you know you're going to kill it round about nowish. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you take a few steps back and one step forward and stuff like that. And sometimes you just kill it when just the stars align. It all goes brilliantly, which nonetheless still propels you forward. And then if you don't kill it that go, you could be hours or even days still wiping on it again. That happens as well. So again, like the min-maxing is quite important for that progress rating. So in a situation like that, if something will give you a bit of extra power and can be done in the time you've got to do it in, because, you know, whether it is or not can be debatable depending on what other, you know, commitments people have got, whether with work or domestic life or anything like that, then, you know, you do have to do it. The majority don't, granted. The majority can just do whichever sort of mode they want. In theory, bear in mind that if the mode you want is casual heroic, you're still going to have to do a lot of stuff around that to be able to get yourself into the heroic pugs that will accept you. So even then, there's still stuff you have to do around that. So it's not, you know, it is sort of true in a way that Blizzard's philosophy is definitely one of making sure there's some power element that rewards people for doing content. That has certainly been their philosophy. So it's true from that point of view. But to say that the player base only respond to that is not true. Because they've shown that. Because where there is content that doesn't give you any power at all, people still do that. And they'll ask for guides on it. And they'll look for guides on it. And they'll spend a lot of time doing that. Next one. I had to sort of pick, there's not much to say about this one, but I had to pick on one little thing though. This is talking about racials, the power of racials. I was sort of talking a little bit about, it's not always, I mean, I did sim racials sometime like a few weeks ago, but it's not always about that. Sometimes it's about the utility side of it. So Arcane Torrent has some decent utility, particularly in Mythic Plus, but in raids as well. The human racial has some utility as well in game, you know, in raids occasionally as well. As the Night Elf ones, you know, Shadow Mel sometimes as well. But this one about here, the Undead Racial actually gets a solid amount of use for me and Antaurus. Being able to drop the fear on Mythic Dogs and the sleep canister on Iminar, saving the healer's mana has been nice. So, I mean, yeah, and that's something that you can't really tell about. Obviously, top guilds, because it comes down to which is it, if you are going to min-max, which of course top guilds are going to do, which is it better to be Horde or Alliance are about the same. And it is, even though it would make no difference if they were balanced. There were a few comments saying, well, what if they did this to balance it? It would make no difference now. I mean, this was the point of the video I was trying to do. It would actually make zero difference. There is nothing now that can be done to equalise the populations. Because if you did balance them, then people would they wouldn't go from, very few people at any rate would go, oh, well, I actually sort of prefer to be Alliance. I know I'll pay a load of money to change back because it's about the same money. Well, no, they're not going to do that. Most people are Horde. Most new players are going to come in, or most casual players that decide to get a bit more serious are going to see that the majority Horde, and they're going to choose to be Horde as well. You know, the whole thing is like it's like an avalanche now. You can't really stop it. But I will have to just point on this. You say that being able to drop the fear on mythic dogs. You're not supposed to get feared on mythic dogs at all. I have been feared 0 times on mythic dogs, and I'm not very good at mythic dogs at all. I've only really done it a few times. You're supposed to stack up with the weight of darkness. I'll just give you that tip that I feel obliged to sort of explain. You're supposed to stack up with the weight of darkness, and you don't get the fear. If you're standing out on your own because, well, you're undead. You don't say what you are as undead. I always, when people say they're undead, I always have this image of them being a warlock. You may not be. I'm guessing you're ranged, because melee, I really can't see even how you can accidentally get fear. But stack up with weight of darkness. That's what you're supposed to do. And then the sleep canister on Immunar. You're not really saving the healer's mana. The healer's not stretched at the point at which that's an issue on either of those platforms, really. But, you know, if you want to use that, you can use that. That's entirely up to you. I'm not going to criticise on the Immunar as such, but I don't think it's necessarily helpful. But, you know, utility is utility. It's one of those things that's very difficult to attach a value to. But, yeah, dropping the fear on mythic dogs. No, not supposed to get feared. Next one. So, it says here, I haven't used Ask Mr. Robot lately in this video, and comments seem to confirm my thoughts. It says, I'd love to see Blizzard implement a way of rating the items for me, but it doesn't seem to be that easy with all the different possibilities and play styles. Now, obviously, Blizzard do have a system of rating items. It's just not effective. It's item level. The problem with item level is it only works if the primary stat is way more powerful than the secondary stats. So the only way item level can work in the way Blizzard want it to is, so in my case, for example, as a strength user, strength has to be much more important than any of the secondary stats. So that way, item level is king, apart from a few small items like trinkets and relics, and then obviously necks and rings, because they insist on not putting primary stats on that, but I'm not in favour of that at all. But nonetheless, that's what they do. Now, in that particular case, the fact that, you know, if the primary stat was so much more powerful than secondary stats, then it would be fine. They would be able to do exactly what they say they want, and that is that if something is, say, 10 item levels above, it will definitely be an upgrade. Although for me, even 10 item levels higher isn't very satisfactory, the fact you have to wait for a 10 item gap. But it would at least allow, say, a baseline normal piece of loot to be better than a baseline LFR piece of loot, and heroic to be better than normal, and mythic to be better than heroic. It would at least allow that, because there's 15 item levels of gap between those. But that's not the case. Like when I sim my stat weights at the moment, strength is the least important, and it's not just by a little bit. Like all the secondary stats are actually fairly close; they're not too far away from each other. The power of the primary stat for me, the power of strength, the stat weight on it for single target is very poor. It's way lower than the others. So item level for me has very little interest. It is much more important the secondary stats on it. Which of course means then, if, I mean, as I say, in my case, it's still not, it doesn't work out that badly, because for Rets the secondary stats are quite close together. But for other specs, there are some specs for whom there's 1 or 2 secondary stats that are way more important than the others, which means that the stats that a piece of gear has on it is way more important than the item level. And that's where it all goes a bit wrong. So, you know, Blizzard are not going to implement a secondary system, because what's the point? That's basically admitting that item level is no good. And there is a way to make sure that item level does work. What they have to do, if they're serious about that, which I'm not sure they are, is they have to make sure that for everyone, the primary stat is king. And they haven't. That's just not been the case. Next one. Says, I think you are super naive for believing there will be a 7.4. Actually, everything points to just another content drought, I assume you mean, like the past 5 expansions. Well, I think putting it 5 expansions might be going a bit much. I don't think it's past 5 expansions, but past few expansions certainly. It is very difficult to say, no, it's fine, Blizzard are going to come good this time. I know that bitter experience stops those words coming out of your mouth without at least a grin on your face, as is the case here. But there is a noticeable difference with Legion. I don't just mean the fact that there's been more content. That's not the noticeable difference for me. The notable difference for me between Legion and past expansions is it's clearly been better organised and scheduled. Now, I don't think that's always been a strength, by the way, because the problem is when you say, right, this is the date we're going to be bringing this out, and we're going to have this, this, and this done, sometimes stuff comes out and it's not actually done. You know, case in point, the Broken Shore, they realised they were going to space out the content, so there was like new stuff to do every week with these Broken Shore quests. Some of them were a bit more involved than others, and they'd intended to spread them out a bit more. So it was like a really involved one, and then a few very minor ones, and then involved ones, stuff like that to keep the interest. The problem is that by the time they got really close to launching it, it was pretty obvious that people were not going to be impressed with this plan. Because people were being told, okay, this patch is coming out, it's got this content in it, but that content wouldn't appear until later on in the patch cycle. And it was quite clear that with the feedback that was being given that people weren't going to be happy about that. So they had to, in their own words, front load it, which meant that what you then had was just a whole series week by week of ever more pathetic quests in that storyline, that cycle. That is an example of where they gave themselves so little time for feedback that they had to just do a quick fix on something that was not at all satisfactory. Now, but in general, but it still nonetheless means that it's been planned out very, very carefully. To do all that and they've brought some stuff out quicker than they had to. You know, they could have, if they couldn't be certain that they'd have stuff to do later on in the expansion, like the last phase of it, then it would have been foolish of them not to have put in little gaps, little buffer, because they could have brought out Nighthold a week or two later than they did. They could have brought out Tomb of Sargeras a week or two later than they did. They could have brought out, you know, Antorus a week or two later than they did. But they didn't. They brought them out when they brought them out. That must mean that they have some plan still to go. Because at the same time as they're bringing out Antorus, remember, they're also announcing that Battle for Azeroth, the aim is to come out by the end of 2018, but that is not certain. They're not even at this moment committing to it coming out at 2018, at the point at which they were releasing Antorus. Now, if you knew that Legion was basically going to be out for most, if not all, of 2018, and you didn't have anything else really planned, I mean content planned, I don't mean just changes to the systems like, you know, zones and like the allied races, which aren't even coming until we can get the BFA advance order anyway. So without any actual content planned, that would be foolish. You know, why wouldn't you just pinch a couple of weeks here or there? You know, it wasn't like people were baying for blood. The people were excited for Antorus to come out, of course. But, you know, they could have left it another week or two and that would still have been fine. It would have been okay. But yeah, so I think it would be exceptional on this particular occasion. Like in all of the other situations, I knew why there was an explanation for why there was a content drought. The first few expansions, the reason was because the people with the money, the people who actually made the decisions, not the developers, were trying to get the developers to move to a cycle of annual expansions, which of course doesn't work with the way Blizzard do them. You know, you couldn't have all that testing for a start. I mean, there's nearly a year of testing goes into an expansion. You'd be bringing out one expansion and then going, right, the beta for the next expansion's open next week. What the hell? You know, when a new expansion comes out, we haven't even announced the next expansion at that point. So, but that was what was causing it. So they were designing content for a year, but then it was ending up being strung over 2 years. That was why we had the content droughts. And then with Warlords of Draenor, of course, it was just because lots of features were just abandoned because they realised that they couldn't deliver on Warlords of Draenor and guarantee that Legion would be good. Because that's another thing to bear in mind. A load of the time and resources that were supposed to be spent on Warlords of Draenor were completely axed and diverted to Legion. So again, it makes no sense that Legion, at the end of all this, with the largest development team, as Blizzard keeps saying, that World of Warcraft has ever had, that they can still not produce new content cycles for a greater period than the last few expansions. You know, none of it makes sense to me. But, you know, the good news is that we will find out within the next few weeks, because the PTR 7.3.5, the latest update has been flagged as a release, which basically means there's nothing new to come in it. So everything that's on the PTR now for 7.3.5 is all of the content that's intended for 7.3.5. It's not in the downloader yet on Battle.net. How much of it, you know, it needs it, I don't know. But that suggests that, you know, probably not next week, but, you know, the reset after next, that might be when 7.3.5 comes out. With it, you would probably expect a Q&A. They've tended to do a live Q&A with Ian Hazakostas or someone else to talk about various features. And then you'd probably also expect them at that point, if there is a 7.4, to say, in a couple of weeks or in 2 or 3 weeks, you can expect to see the PTR for 7.4 going up. If they don't say that, then that would add some credence to the fact that they're basically going to leave us with 2018 with nothing to do. But that would be really bad, because it would, I've said this before, it would completely wreck all the work they've done in Legion. Wreck it completely. Because, for a couple of reasons. First of all, there was a reason why we got the content droughts before. There is no reason why we'd get a content drought this time. None of those reasons hold up. So if they did it again this time, no one would ever believe them again. Not many people are believing them this time, you know, case in point. And then the other thing is that it's just inexplicable that they're going to do nothing at all for a whole year. Absolutely inexplicable. Anyway, that's we'll soon find out. You know, within 4 weeks, we would know for certain. Next comment. Completely agree with this. For PvE, there should be no barriers. It makes sense to keep PvP with the barriers, but ironically enough, they have a system where you can play with the other faction on PvP even. That seems ridiculous to me that they have that, but not any sort of PvE cross-faction play whatsoever. I hadn't actually thought of that, but yeah, a couple of people have sort of mentioned this. There was a system in Warlords of Draenor, which I hadn't forgotten about, because I don't PvP, it's not really in my mind, of mercenaries. I think the idea is to ease queues, like some people in battlegrounds and things like that can be in queues for quite a long time. And it's, I think it was, I could be wrong on this. When it comes to PvP matters, not real expert. But I think the idea was, you know, it could sort of move people to the other faction and disguise them, like disguise a dwarf as an orc or something like that. Give them some stilts and some green skin. And just to help the queues, basically. If there was one faction where there's many more people queuing than the other, then the people for whom the larger faction effectively would be stuck in queues for longer, we'll put them in the other one, even it out a bit, get more battlegrounds going. And yeah, so yeah, there was, I don't, does it still exist? I don't even know if it still exists, but it certainly did, it did come in, yeah, the mercenary system. So yes, it is a bit baffling that, you know, I play some games where, as a PvE player, like, I know, like, Lord of the Rings Online, Elder Scrolls Online, classic examples, well, the two big examples for me, where I know if someone else, if I met someone and they said, oh, I play that as well, that I'd be able to play with them. You know, I'd be able to join them and play with them. But I wouldn't have to ask about what faction. World of Warcraft, I'd have to say, well, are you on this realm or that realm? Are you of this particular faction, which is the key point of this, or not? And, you know, if they were the wrong faction, you know, that's no good. But yeah, I'm not going to go on again about how I think there should be they should just mix everything into a melting pot with PvE. But yeah, this comment just brought it to me that, yeah, actually, the opposite is true in PvP. In PvP, faction is a bit more malleable, which is ironic because faction only makes sense for PvP. So if they're willing to allow them to muddy the waters a bit for PvP, it seems strange that they wouldn't for PvE, where from a storyline point of view, it's quite easy to do. Really easy. But there you go, they don't. At the same time, no one's really asked them about it, so we don't know that they're opposed to the idea, they just haven't done it. That doesn't mean to say they're opposed to it. Next one now, when it comes to asking questions of Blizzard, I feel as if the interviews outside of what happens at BlizzCon are very scripted with what questions people are able to ask. I also feel that a lot of streamers that do get invited to Blizz HQ or get invited to do interviews get very timid about criticism of Blizzard and any of their games. Well, certainly they are scripted. It's one of those things. So I'm going to take the two to begin with. The live Q&As, obviously they are super scripted. I mean, although they do them live, I sometimes wonder why. Because they don't really respond to the chat at all. They certainly don't take questions from the chat. Even at the end, they don't take questions from the chat. They get the questions that have been tweeted to them or sent on a forum. But again, they pick and choose which ones they want. And also it means they get time to think of the response, which is actually okay. Giving people time to think of the response is fine. But yeah, it's certainly, there's no discussion part of it. Whereas when you've got someone actually live interviewing someone, you can have a back and forth. The problem with the live Q&A format is it's literally, and the same with BlizzCon. You say about BlizzCon not being scripted, and although it isn't, nonetheless, it's still in the same bracket because person asks a question, they give their response. Now, if they don't want to answer that question, they will just give a standard politician's parry response, like diverting, like there was the question about faction being important in BFA and what should they do, and the response was, you should play whichever faction you want. Now, we know that that's, there's a lot of pressures that prevent you doing that, depending on what you do in the game. But that was just completely battered away. There was no follow-up allowed. So the only way you can get a follow-up, which is the sensible question, is if someone is actually live interviewing someone. And as you quite rightly say, anyone who live interviews them is probably thinking, and never mind at the back of their mind, at the front of their mind, they're probably thinking, I would like to do this again sometime. They're not going to ask me to do it if I ask them a load of harsh questions, which may or may not be true. It's not really being tested, so it may or may not be true. But the approach I would take, I mean, first of all, it wouldn't make sense for someone to come in and just ask a load of accusatory questions, because then immediately someone could turn around and go, why do you even play this game? You obviously hate it. And that would be really weird. You should ask different types of questions. But what I definitely think that should be in amongst the questions is something that no one else has asked and that you think the community would really want to know the answer to. And you can phrase interviews in a way that makes you, as the interviewer, the devil's advocate, without being confrontational about it. So I think there is a way of doing interviews that would get these questions across without necessarily upsetting the interviewer, unless I mean, I'm sure some would. Some do seem to be a bit special and have a huge inferiority complex to the point where they really don't like questions that they might take as a challenge. But I think there'd be plenty of people who would do an interview that would be okay with it as well. And you just don't hammer home too much. If they stonewall you with a response that's clearly not going to give you the answer, then you just move on. You just accept, okay, they don't want to answer that question, let's just move on, and you carry on with other questions. So part of it may just be that these people feel they don't want to jeopardize a potential follow-up interview, if you see what I mean. And so no one ever really tries it. Next one, it says, what do you think about Scrubbusters' move to Horde? Just another top guild moved. Well, I mean, I sort of did a video, of course, about it, but again, I was talking mostly about faction balance. Where it leaves us, so if we look at the rankings for Antorus, where it leaves us is only one top 20 EU English guild left. There's also only one Alliance guild that plays on North American realms. I think they're actually an OC guild, but I think they play on North American realms. And it leaves you with 2 Russian Alliance guilds. So if we take it from like my sphere, so to speak, obviously I'd never have intended to join Scrubbusters at any point in the past anyway. But let's say, so for EU English, let's say. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean for people who speak English as their first language, but can speak English fluently. That means you go from 2 guilds to 1 guild. So imagine the situation. So there's some players who want to play at the very top end, like seriously top end. And they're Alliance players. Scrubbusters is no longer an ambition of theirs. They can't get into Scrubbusters because they're going Horde. That leaves this one other guild. And that guild may change as well. They may not be top 20 next time. It might be someone else. Who knows? So then you think to yourself, okay, from that player's point of view, are they going to stick around and just now try and get into that other guild? Because maybe they'd have been okay with either of those 2 guilds. Now their options have halved if they want to get into the top 20. So that means there's going to be extra pressure for at least some of those players to go Horde. Because I'm certainly going to suggest that if players are going to be pushing top 20 and even top 10, and with Scrubbusters, of course, they really want to push into that top 5, that you're probably going to be less influenced by faction. Even if you really do enjoy the storyline World of Warcraft, you're going to put, you know, what's best for you in terms of progress higher. Because the amount of time and effort these guys put in, even if they don't like daytime raid, is still quite heroic. And for the sake of a faction change getting you significantly more progress, a lot of people are probably just going to do that. So extra pressure for them to do that. That means that the other guild, the one remaining Alliance guild, EU English guild at any rate, is going to find it even harder to get recruits. They may already have been finding it hard to get recruits. So then that guild may then have to make a decision whether they go Horde or not, or just disband. And maybe that, you know, that causes them big problems, or they slip down the rankings because they are going to now find it much more difficult to recruit. So in the short term, they may find it easier because some of those people now, they're Alliance, well, there's now this guild. But in the long term, you'd think a lot of those players are just going to go, do you know what? Opportunities are drying up. They'll go there. And then the worry is that there's a trickle-down effect to that. So then that guild disappears. All of a sudden, there's no Alliance guilds. And there's the practical side of it, which is the trickle-down effect of drying up potential recruits because more and more of them go Horde. And then there's the role model effect, where, like in anything, you know how it is, where it's just like in life, certain demographics of people are less likely to go into certain professions because they don't see anyone at the top of that profession as a role model. And the same thing can apply here. You know, when you see it's basically Horde guilds, anyone who wants to get into serious raiding is probably just going to be thinking, even at the point at which they enter, it might make no difference at all. In fact, almost certainly won't. They'll be thinking, well, if you want to raid, you should go Horde. That's just what they'll be thinking. And they're much more likely. And if you're going to go from casual to serious as well, it's not even an expense thing. Because if you're a casual player, well, there's nothing on that character you really need anyway. What's to stop you? Let's say you're thinking roundabout now of, you've been casual up to now, and you're thinking of going serious for the next expansion. So you've got ages to do that. You can go Horde and you can level up some characters and just play casually on Horde, but be in a position to get yourself ready for joining a guild for the start of Battle for Azeroth. So that's easy to do, and as I say, it doesn't cost you anything. You're just going to start a new character on a different faction and on a realm that suits as well. So that's what I think about it. I worry that it's going to have a ripple effect downwards in making it more and more difficult. I mean, for example, my guild at the moment is really on the lookout for a good resto druid. Hint, hint. Failing that, I suppose, a boomkin, because we do have a boomkin that has a resto aspect. They're quite happy to play resto. Ideally, what you'd want is a really experienced and good resto druid, though. But, you know, worst comes to worst, the Boom King goes resto. But then we've lost a Boom King, and when we're coming up to fight that actually really wants a Boom King. But, you know, it's one of those things. But there's several things that are going to make it difficult for us. One is that we didn't make any progress over Christmas because, you know, Christmas. But a lot of guilds do. A lot of guilds focus on that progress. They'll even abandon farm to get the progress. And so the world ranking suffered for that. So we're not even that appealing. You know, we've killed, what, 7? We're hopefully going to get 8 tonight out of 11. But the fact that we're Alliance I mean, I know this because I know from trying to recruit in my previous guild. Just being Alliance alone shuts so many doors for you already. And if it gets significantly worse, Alliance guilds are just not going to be able to support themselves in anything like any sort of progress-minded raiding. There is a realistic prospect of Battle for Azeroth being the nail in the coffin of Alliance raiding. It's quite alarmist. It may not happen, but there's every possibility it can. And that this is just like, not even the start of it, this is just like another continuation in that chapter. Next one. So it says, solution to the LFR and normal topic. Get rid of LFR and modify normal. Split the raid into 2 wings, not 4, and tune it so that each wing can be completed in 2-ish hours. Make it harder than LFR is now, but slightly easier than normal is currently. The philosophy around this is to make it similar to Classics, LBRS and UBRS. The loot that drops would be equivalent to Mythic 0 dungeons. Raiding should not be for anyone with smaller time commitments than a few hours. If they want to do shorter time frame content, then dungeons is where it's at. Well, there's a couple of things there. First of all, just coming to the last point there, that's not how other people will see it, though. The argument stretching back years has always been, if this is a subscription game, so people paying... I mean, well, the argument is that everyone pays the same subscription. It's not actually true, because I pay double what most people do, because I have 2 accounts. But in general, the argument holds that someone playing it very casually is paying the same amount as someone who's playing it a lot. So they want access to that content. Now, whether that argument's valid or not is a different matter, but that is the argument that holds sway. So we're not going to get around that one. But if we take point by point, first of all, so solution to the LFR and normal topic. Now, granted, this was in response to something we're talking about, but you do have to sort of probably explain what it's a solution to what problem. Because I strongly suspect, although there's many of us who may see a problem, the main problem I see with 4 modes of difficulty is, because I'm not totally against them, by the way, because I only see 1 difficulty, and that's the inflation of item level that comes with it. Because you've got these, you need these gaps of item level between them. That means that, you know, especially in an expansion with, like we've had several tiers, 3 tiers, as well as other raids as well that are not tier. That basically means the difference between a newly dinged character and a well-geared character is massive. I'll give you a for instance. I dinged my Shaman yesterday. I got 110 with my Shaman yesterday. And, you know, I got a couple of WoW tokens, put them on the auction house, so I've got some gold. And I just basically bought some BOE gear for them. And I'm now at 870 something item level just by buying gear, BOE gear, and a couple of items from quests, and that's basically it. And I'm now 870 something item level, or is it 860 something? It's about 870-ish item level anyway. That is way ahead of the item level I had when I dinged. Way ahead of it. But it's still way behind my main character, my paladin, who's on 960-ish item level. You know, I'm on nearly 100 item levels above. Now, for me, 100 item level gap should be roughly between where you ding and where you end an expansion. But it's not. It's actually, when it's finished, I don't even like to think where it'll be. But it might be knocking on for 300 item levels. The difference between when you ding and, well, not 300, that might be exaggerating a bit. 200 odd at any rate. That's huge to me. But that is, for me, the problem with it. To which a solution might well be to combine it. My thoughts is I would rather just combine normal and heroic. Or just get rid of normal. Just get rid of normal. But, you know. So if that's the solution that's been talked about, get rid of LFR and modify normal. I think LFR serves a completely different audience to normal. See, the thing is, normal and heroic don't necessarily serve very different audiences. So you could combine them. But you can't with LFR. And you can't say, well, those people shouldn't be able to raid because, well, their money says otherwise. I think is how Blizzard see it. And then in terms of the loot that drops be equivalent to Mythic Naught dungeons, again, that would help reduce that item level bloat. But again, how many people really have a big deal with the item level bloat? Because the way Blizzard deal with it is they give catch-up gear. So, for example, I mean, on my Shaman, I could easily catch up just by doing a load of Argus stuff, go around doing the Argus World Quest, get the Veiled Argonite, get my... I mean, straight away I can do... When I've done the quests, I've got to obviously do the quests, I could do the Greater Invasions each week and maybe get a 930 piece of gear, especially if I coin it, give myself a bit of an extra chance. And I can also do... get the Veiled Argonite at least once a week without doing very much. And in reality, if I did more than not very much, I could easily get more. And they're straight up 9-10 pieces. So you can catch up with the gear pretty easily. Which means that item level bloat isn't that big a deal for a lot of people. Sure, they'll struggle a bit, although there's a little bit of scaling goes on Argus. If they've just dinged and they don't do what I do and splash out a load of gold and get that, it also means they might have to wallow in normal dungeons for a while until they get a few of those pieces. But nonetheless, the option exists to catch up on that gear if they put some time, and it doesn't have to be that much time to catch up. So, you know, although I see it as a bit of a problem, I don't think a lot of people do. So I think ultimately the 4 will remain because they serve audiences and there isn't actually a problem from Blizzard's point of view with it. And that last one now, it says, no matter what people say, I'll never get Titanforging. It totally kills the loot joy, since whenever you get an item, if it's basic, you feel cheated instead of being happy that you got the item. Sometimes it's the other way around. I actually agree with this. You do, don't you? If you get a baseline item, you're not very happy if it's actually baseline, because you wanted it to be Titanforged, especially if it's a really good item. That actually makes it worse when it's a really good item. But I have actually had 2 significantly Titanforged pieces of gear and been disappointed in Antorus. So the first time round, it was in Heroic. So Heroic drops 845 gear. 945. Do you know what? I keep doing that. Sorry. 945. But I got them to Titanforge up to 970. Well, that's fantastic, you would think. The problem, well, they were, and I'm still wearing them now, of course. The problem is that there's actually a few pairs of boots, plate boots, that drop in on Taurus. One of them has my more ideal stats, and these were not them. So, although I was happy to get 970 boots, which at the time I had 930 ones, I was disappointed that this hadn't happened with the BIS boots. And then the other one is what I got this week. So at the moment, I'm in the situation where I'm wearing 4-piece tier 20, 2-piece tier 21, blah, blah, blah. I eventually wanted to move through the following phases. So when I get high enough item level tier 21, which is round about now-ish is when I'm hoping to get it, but it just won't drop. I'd like to move to 4-piece tier 21. Then what I'd hope is, again, shortly, that the item level of everything else would be the point where my tier 20 2-piece, which would now not be so attractive, would be significantly behind in item level. And in actual fact, I could afford to drop the tier 22 piece, which would allow me to use my legendary cloak. But here's where Titanforge basically gave me a kick in the knackers, because I got an 880 tier cloak this week. And I was disappointed. I was not at all happy. It's actually a carbon copy of what happened in not Nighthold, Tomb of Sargeras. I got 950 tier gloves, but they were not good stats. And I was disappointed because they were my only Titanforged bits of tier. And I'd have much rather it on basically any other piece of tier than the gloves. And didn't get it. But the same thing's happened with the cloak. It's like the cloak was the one of the pieces of tier that I wanted to do without eventually. That's not likely to happen now, because it's 880. I'm not going to be getting 880 with other bits of tier. And it's not far enough behind the legendary cloaking item level to be worthwhile. So I'm quite sure the legendaries I'm using at the moment, which are not that far behind anyway, are probably going to still stay ahead when you look at the overall combination. So absolutely, you know, I think it worked both ways. You can be disappointed when you don't get Titanforged, and I have been disappointed on the 2 times in Antorus when I have got Titanforged. Although some people may not have much sympathy for that one, at least. So yeah, it is. But as I keep saying, as I sort of said with, you know, with the previous topic with Elephant normal heroic, it serves a purpose. Titanforging, sorry, it does exactly what Blizzard said they wanted it to achieve. You know, when Legion was, you know, was just coming out with the alpha and beta, and they were talking about what's going to be in there. I think, in fact, they talked about Titanforging even at the BlizzCon where they announced it. And they sort of said what they wanted it to achieve, and that's what it does achieve. So there's no reason to suggest they're going to remove it. They have said they're going to tweak it a bit, but we'll have to see what that involves. I think they did say that Titanforging happens a bit too much. Although from my point of view, I think Titanforging would be even worse if it was rarer. But, you know, that'll be a topic for another time when we start to see what they actually intend for BFA, rather than speculating on it now. And there we go, that's the end of this week's mailbox. Thanks very much for watching. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a like. Comments down below, because I may pick up on some of these for next week's. If this is first time to our channel, don't forget to subscribe, please. And until next time, I shall see you later.